Good morning. Welcome to the first monthly meeting of the Greenwich Board of Selectmen in January and the first meeting of the calendar year 2019. Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a public meeting of the Board of Selectmen, not a public hearing, although the chair always reserves the right to call upon any interested attendee to pose a question or make a comment on any matter that's before the board today. There are copies of the meeting's agenda on the table as you come in, and should be a set of the materials that we'll be reviewing today. The main item of business for us is the continuing discussion on the readoption of the senior tax relief ordinance here in the town, and we'll be discussing that momentarily. I do want to begin our first meeting of the year to take liberties with some acknowledgments. And the first acknowledgment I'd like to provide is to offer our thanks and gratitude to our retiring legislators, Senator Scott France and Representative Michael Bacino. Mr. France serving 10 years, Mr. Bacino 4, and wish them well with their future and expectation that they will remain actively involved in our community. I do want to thank the Greenwich delegation in total, and particularly Mr. Bacino, Representative Bacino, for his efforts for the New Lebanon School. He was here on Tuesday to present a check for $17 million to further demonstrate their success in overcoming great odds and getting about 64% of that new elementary school's funding for our town. So I do want to acknowledge what really is an extraordinary effort on Michael Bacino's part in the delegation. But I also want to offer heartiest congratulations and success to our new governor and his team. We are very privileged here in Greenwich to have, as our 89th governor, Ned Lamont. Ned served as a selectman here in Greenwich from 1987 to 1989, and then subsequently, 4 years after that, he was on the Board of Estimate and Taxation. We are one of 169 towns, and we have the honor and pleasure of having the governor be one of our own. I think that's a special honor for our town, and we look forward to working with him and the spirit in which he's embarked on his administration, which is one of great optimism and hope for a brighter Connecticut, and I think we all share that, irrespective of parties. I think that's the beauty of elections. We move on and we focus on putting the interests of our constituents first. So I wish Governor Lamont well and his team, and hopefully we'll be able to work with him in our respective roles for which time we have in them. I do also want to wish our new delegation, Senator Bergstein, Representative Florin, Meskers, and Camillo well. I'll be talking a little bit under updates at an event that occurred where many of them were present, but they also began their tenures yesterday, and I wish them well and look forward to working with each of them to represent our constituents. And I look forward to working with my colleagues here, Sandy and John, for the remaining year.
We start a new year.
Yeah. Minutes, Barbara, I know that we had an issue with minutes from our last meeting with holidays and issues, so we'll take that next meeting. I just wanted to briefly touch upon some updates since the beginning of the year. Believe it or not, a lot takes place once the calendar turns and the holidays are over. The first matter I wanted to share with you is that on Thursday, January 3rd, I participated in the annual credit rating calls with Standard & Poor's and Moody's. And I'm happy to report that the town once again received AAA ratings from both agencies. And as I was sitting in this call with our very capable finance staff, members of the BET, our very capable town administrator, I was thinking about the exercise that we were going through, and I was equating it to like your annual physical. where you go in and they check your vitals and they check your weight and they make sure that you're healthy. And in many ways, when you look at the criteria that the rating agencies are assessing to assign this rating, they have a very prescribed process in terms of looking at, the management of the town and its finances and administration. They look at how you've addressed your liabilities, both pension and post-employment. They look at your track record in terms of managing your taxes and your budget and mill rates, and they look at the overall economic health of the community. So when I receive the report, and we'll know, I believe later today, the exact cost for this issuance, which is $100 million, $60 million in short-term notes and $40 million in bond anticipation notes. I think we could collectively say as a town, and not just the town, my administration, but the BET, the RTM boards, we all have a lot to be proud of in that as stewards, and not just us, but all the folks, have really made a conscious effort to make wise decisions to benefit the citizens of the town. And so I think, we start off with a good health report. I think that's how I would summarize the rating agency call. It was an affirmation. On Monday, I was up in Norwalk at the Norwalk Indian Conference Center for what was really the first legislative delegation, call it a caucus. It was put forth by the Fairfield Five, which is Greenwich, Stamford, Norwalk, Westport, and Fairfield. We've all come together to share in advocating for our region. Mayor Martin of Stamford is our chair. This entity has no legal authority. It's a consortium vested in the idea that we have many more similarities and interests than differences, and that we should begin to focus and work together on where we could help our respective towns, cities, and region. And I was happy to hear essentially that's what Governor Lamont is saying. We have to think more globally about our issues, not so much parochially. So we were pleased to have, I would say, 18 legislators. Just about all the legislators who represent those towns were present, some of the more senior, some of the new. And I think the takeaway from the whole program and when everyone went around as to what they felt came of it is that we've opened up clear lines of communication with our delegation. We've shared with them what our 5-town interests are in terms of addressing transportation, assuring that we have the intellectual and human capital resources to provide businesses with the higher education institutions, and tweaking that to make sure that there's an understanding of what exactly do these companies need, particularly with technology, not so much with trades, because that seems to be working. We also talked about marketing the area, for lack of a better word, but really accentuating what we have that's positive about Fairfield County. And then what legislation, what resources can be directive to reap the benefit. And if you listen to Governor Lamont's speech, as I did, he kept repeating one word over and over again: growth. And he's going to focus as governor on, growth for Connecticut. And second, he's going to partner that with being positive. And we've heard so much about who wants to hear what's wrong with yourself? You know what's wrong with you, right, when you look in the mirror, but you also know what's right, and let's focus on the positive. So this group, I think, felt positive that we've come together, we're in the same room, we're communicating, and we have a shared interest, and that our job really is to help communicate that to the rest of the state, because there's been this long-standing perception that you folks in Fairfield County don't have the needs as elsewhere, and the fact of the matter is we do. So I was very encouraged. I also was joined by Representative Florin, Meskers, and Senator Bergstein, as well as in Stamford. I just point out that we have two representatives who, while they represent Stamford, were educated and families are here in Greenwich, and that's Matthew Blumenthal and Caroline Simmons. So I wasted no time in going up to them and congratulating them and say, look, remember, You grew up in Greenwich. Don't forget us. We consider you a bonus. So we're off to a very positive start in terms of the focus and the sentiment, and I think, and I hope and pray that that endures, because I really think that's the expectation people have. So very excited Monday. Finally, I came back here. We had promotions within the fire department. Deputy Chief Tom Nixon retired after well over 30 years with the department, 31 years to be exact. Succeeding him is Lieutenant Sean Morris, and that cascades to an opening in the position of lieutenant, and firefighter George Latanzi assume that role. There will be a future promotion ceremony for new hires, I believe at the end of this month. Those candidates then will have to go on to the academy. Looking forward, next Wednesday, January 16th, is the annual YWCA program celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day. This year's program is focusing on fighting modern-day slavery, a conversation about the tragedy of labor trafficking. The moderator for this program is Krishna Patel. She's General Counsel and Director of Justice Initiatives at the Grace Farms Foundation and a former federal prosecutor. Luis Dibaca is a lawyer and former U.S. Ambassador at Large to monitor and combat trafficking in persons and former Director of the Department of Justice SMART Office. In addition, the panel will include Divya D'Amato, CEO and co-founder of Good Ops, Jillian Gilchrist, she's former chair of the Connecticut Trafficking in Persons Council and was recently elected to the Connecticut State House of District 18, which I believe is West Hartford. And finally, Ressa Spaziani, who's the Director of Wage and Workplace Standards, Connecticut Department of Labor. Again, this begins at 6:30 at the YW on Wednesday, January 16th, and lasts till 8 p.m. You can register to sign up for this free program at ywcagreenwich.org/labor trafficking registration. Many partners, including the town, involved with this. Several of our diverse houses of worship, non-government organizations, the ADL Connecticut, Yale New Haven Health, and I just think it's a very timely program, and one that I commend President and CEO Mary Kiernan for bringing to us, because believe it or not, it's happening here in Connecticut and here in Greenwich, Connecticut. On February 2nd, the Greenwich Diversity Planning Committee, in partnership with the First Selectmen's Youth Commission, is holding a Greenwich Student Diversity Leadership Conference. This is going to take place from 8:30 to 4 p.m. at Greenwich Academy. Up to 100 students from all high schools in the town will participate in a day of conversation and collaboration on issues that personally impact their lives. The conference was motivated by the First Selectmen's Diversity Committee's commitment to encourage Greenwich youth to engage in conversation involving diversity and inclusion. The committee connected with the First Selectmen's Youth Commission developed a partnership with Charlie Siporin, a Brunswick student in the chair of the Youth Commission, who has done diversity work at his school. The whole conference will be framed around intersectionality, a concept that has become increasingly more significant in conversations about equity and social justice. Students will have the opportunity to participate in activities and discussions focused on 8 core identifiers: race, religion, sexuality, ability, socioeconomic status, age, gender, and nationality, and how these identifiers intersect in different ways for individuals. Members of the Diversity Planning Committee include student and faculty leaders in diversity at several Greenwich schools. Most diversity conferences are only available to independent schools and include a registration fee. Members of the planning committee believed that it was essential to invite Greenwich High School and ensure that the program was free to all participants. So this is eligible for students in grades 9 through 12, and you can register using the program's Google form, which we issued out in the press release. To learn more about the Youth Commission and its programs, you can go to the town website, greenwichct.gov, for Selectmen's Youth Commission. And again, I have to give kudos to Charlie and his colleagues there. They really are striving to make an impact and address an important issue of our time and really celebrate great about our community. That concludes the updates. Barbara, our next meeting is scheduled for what?
24th.
Okay, so I will just add in, that happens to be the same day that I'm required to present a budget to the Board of Estimate and Taxation's Budget Committee. So I'll take the time now to remind folks, if you're interested in seeing what we present, it'll be at 6 p.m. in the Town Hall Meeting Room. I can just share with both Sandy and John the status of the budget. Essentially, we had a capital hearing in December, and the difference this year with what we brought forth was that we actually presented the requests that were being sought in 1920 rather than what was anticipated in the 1819, and then used that as a point of departure. So right now, the Board of Ed has a capital request in the neighborhood of 26 million. Some of that begins to look at their overall facility plan. And the town really has rolled forward a number of projects that you've been hearing about, either for planning funds, such as Northwest Fire EMS, or the Civic Center, in the ice rink, a number of bridge projects, and then, of course, our annual maintenance. So from what the departments presented and what the Board of Ed has presented, there have been little to no adjustment, to be candid with you. I mean, because these people have spent a lot of time working throughout the year and in lead up the timing for these. So aside from any changes until the 24th, the BET will have their wisdom with it. The operating budget is a little bit of a different story. We were given, I think, some fairly strict guidelines for the town side of 0 to 1% increase. I think everyone here can do simple math and knows when you have contractual increases is in excess of 2%, that's a challenge. So, we're working to tighten as best we can, but we can't starve the non-salary areas. I mean, those provide resources to effectuate the service. So we're working with, actually, Lauren, we're working with you because you're one of our silver bullets in this whole thing, because you have the revenue projection. And we're hopeful that your revenue projections are good, because that's going to help us. And of course, as the assessor, you sign off on the grand list. The BET has the timing benefit of that being January 31st. Notice I'm a week before that, but you've been kind to sit down with us and give us kind of a glimmer as to where we're going with that. But as I like to tell people, what we all do is judgments. It's a series of judgments. I will just share with you my thinking. People desire services in this community. We're recognized for that. It adds value to our residency. When you look at our financial condition, as I just opened with, I think we're in a very enviable position in relation to our peer communities. Total indebtedness, low in relation to our peer communities. New Canaan actually had like 82% of indebtedness per total expenditure when you looked at what their total expenditures are. So I think we're going to have robust conversations. I heard the messages from the people at the hearing. You had a balance of those who want advancement of the projects and those who are handling restraint. And I think, as I always say, it's a balance. It's a balance, and we'll present a balance.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you will. I never comment on these things, but I am going to comment, because I largely agree with you with perhaps an additional emphasis. I don't think it's different than what you're saying, but I just want to emphasize it because to some extent I bring a different perspective. And that is this. The risk to this town, and I agree with everything you say about its financial stability, the risk to this town is not raising operating costs by 2%. That is not the risk. The risk is not doing the things that have to be done, whether it's capital or operating. That's the risk. This town, which we all love, we all live here, we all made a decision to live here, is growing dated, for lack of a better word, on the fringes. And it's important that we keep our infrastructure, that we do the things that I know you are promoting, and I respect you for that, and I endorse it. But, and maybe this is a call out to the BET and others, it's time to step up, and it's time to stop saying, oh, we can't increase anything, oh my gosh, our mill rate may go up a fraction of an amount. It's time to face the fact that the town has to keep pace. We are low in our mill rate. We are high in our credit rating, high meaning AAA, and we ought to take advantage of that. Our schools, our schools really need help. They really do. And trying to scrimp, we're scrimping in the wrong places and at the wrong time. It's time to invest. You talk about Governor Lamont talking about growth. We want growth here too, and it's not just a matter of economic development. Put all that aside. You need growth in our schools. You need growth in our infrastructure. You need growth in the quality of everything around here. And you got to spend money to make money. It's just that simple. It's the way it is in business. It's the way it is in life. You can't sit and constantly pinch every penny. It just doesn't work. So I endorse everything you're saying.
Thank you. Well, that's sign Mr. Litvak up, speaker number 1, public hearing, 7 o'clock, January 24th, followed by Mr. Toner. See, I got people who have got my back. Thank you.
Got your back, absolutely.
So that's where we are with the budget. So there's no real surprise. Again, there's no element of surprise. It is what it is. But I wanted to point out though that guideline comment because it just when I really focus it just almost you're handcuffed. And I go back to the citizen satisfaction survey, which really affirmed support for what we're doing.
Yeah, but Peter, you don't. And I know you know this, so I'm not lecturing on it. You don't want to wait till the survey doesn't say that before you start addressing the issue. Yeah,
that's a good point. So come on that date, and that really kicks off the whole process for the year. And this is on the town web, Barbara. We were just given this. This is the revised, as of January 8th, calendar of all the meetings that are public that you can attend on the budget. Would you like to say something? No. Okay. All right, so moving right along, we have on our agenda today, under old business, the readoption of the senior tax relief ordinance. By way of background, this ordinance has been in existence since 2000. It has gone through, I think, 4 iterations. It has to go through this board, the BET, the RTM. I think this board, at our last meeting, was very interested in seeing and hearing what impact we could make to helping seniors who are outside the current parameters achieve some relief with the overall goal of helping them stay in their home. I mean, I think that's how I look at it, and that's a good thing. It ties directly what our Commission on Aging is doing. So that was really one element which we're looking to hear today. The second element has come up previously, and that has to do with disabled individuals. And I know I've spoken to Lauren. You've been very helpful, and we'll talk about this. We had one gentleman write to us, and I've actually spoken with him on this subject and then another subject unrelated to relief. And his whole point is that there are a number of people, he has a daughter who has a disability, who owns a condominium in Greenwich, and I don't want to give any more details because I think it's somewhat of a personal thing, but she has a disability, and in having this or a program applicable for her will help her stay here in town. So that's another element in terms of what I requested, and I know that you've been aware of, for us to consider to incorporate into this ordinance. And so I'm not going to say any more. I know that we've got the experts with us, and you have our undivided attention.
Lauren, can I ask a quick question? Goes to this. What is the current total real property tax levy for the town?
Our total value?
Yeah, I'd say that.
Well, it's about 33 billion assessed value, which equates to about 46.7 billion dollars fair market value. That's real estate, personal property, and other things. That's your total value. May go up to
Oh.
can't pick it up. Actually, one of my, I think
If you could just repeat that so then
Sure.
it doesn't sound.
So our total taxable grand list is it's going to be roughly about $33 billion this year.
Real estate, real property only.
Real property is 31,
Okay.
okay, roughly. You have two other lists. You have your personal property list and your motor vehicle list.
I was just focusing on just real
Real
property.
property is the big portion of it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to, I think, just go with this, okay? You're okay with that? Okay. And try to answer some of the questions that came up last year, or last meeting, which was last year. First of all, let me kind of back up a little bit and kind of explain a few things that is out there for people already under state statutes. Under state statutes, there are exemptions, and when I say exemptions, that's a number that comes off your assessed value. That's different than a tax credit or property tax relief. Under state statute, we have exemptions for blind, disabled, and veterans. By law, this town of Greenwich grants those exemptions, provided you qualify for them. Those exemptions are given regardless of any financial need. Okay. Now, in addition to that, based on financial need, the state also offers the senior program, which is what our local property tax relief program basically piggybacks. It's very similar. And that's based on income and financial need. Okay? So you can get exemptions regardless of your financial need for being blind, disabled, and a veteran. You can also get, if you qualify financial need, additional tax relief through the senior program. And that means you have to be 65 and older. For the state program, you have to have income between $0 and $43,900. The local program, which is very similar to that, you have to have income between $0 and $66,000. That's where it stands currently. I haven't created or calculated out what's going to happen in this grand list yet. I have to wait for that. The requirements are the same. When we're looking at financial need, it's the household income. It is not just the individual's income, it's the household income. They have to be a resident, which means they have to be here 6 months and 1 day, and they must reside in this home. So the state program, we have roughly 274 seniors on the state program.
Can you
currently.
repeat that again?
274 seniors on the state program. And these figures I'm quoting from the 2017 grant list, because that's the last list that we applied this to. For our local senior program, last year, we had 516 people on it, and that includes the 274 on the state program. If you qualify for the state program, you automatically get it for our local, okay? So if you actually add up the greatest benefit on the state and add up what we give on the local level, you could have up to $3,500 in property tax relief.
Does the state provide any financing for that?
The state did. It has in the past. Last year it did not, from my understanding. Last year, our number, it's roughly about, the last reimbursement I believe we got was in 2016. It was about $155,000. Last year, we had a reduction of $149,000. Now, the statute 12-129B and C, which this says a taxpayer, a property owner shall be entitled to. That's what the statute says. So regardless of whether the state funds us and refunds us this credit, we have an obligation to provide it. The statute says that a property owner shall be entitled to. That leads me to believe that regardless of whether we get reimbursement, it is something that we have to provide until I'm told otherwise. Okay? Now, to the question of disabled. The disabled requirements are that you have to be on a state program to get the $1,000 exemption, requires you to be 100% disabled. And you have to have some sort of proof. Usually it's a Social Security disability. Okay. That's the one that is regardless of financial need. The state program also provides for those people with a financial need the same benefit that you would have gotten if you were a senior in the state program. In other words, it will allow you, if your income is under $43,900, it will grant you the same credit or tax relief as though you were a senior. You have to be 100% disabled. Your income cannot exceed the $43,900. You have to live and reside in the property. It includes your entire household income, and you have to be the property owner of it. Okay? You do have to have an ownership interest in it. It can be a spouse, one of your spouses. Okay, so but in creating and looking at the income, we look at the total household income.
But did I understand you, Laura? You have to be a senior as well?
No.
No?
Okay, that's where
Misunderstood.
right.
All
Okay,
right.
so here's so the senior program on the state level says if you're 65 and older, you can get this, right? If you're not 65
But disabled,
but disabled,
same thing.
same thing. Okay, simple. Okay, sorry if I made that a little bit more complicated than it was.
So expanding upon that, because you followed through nicely the state, then rolls into the local. Does the local currently?
Our local option does not provide for disabled. Now, I will tell you this: we have 22 people who do get the disabled exemption, which shows
State disabled.
the state disabled exemption. Of those 22, only 2 of them show the financial need, so they are actually on on the state program for the financial need portion of it. So in other words, we have 22 disabled people getting that $1,000 exemption, that exemption. That exemption is given regardless of their financial need. Of those 22, two of them are qualifying for, which means their income is under $43,000.
Are they, do you know, any one of the 22 also seniors?
Most of them, yeah, they are, over 65.
Yeah.
And but ultimately what happens, as soon as a disabled person becomes 65, we don't really keep track of the disabled anymore, but they do continue their disabled exemption. They're still getting Social Security, it's just not Social Security disability anymore. They're getting Social Security because they're 65. So that's how it works. So we do have 22 people out there that may or may not qualify if you were to take the local option and add that disabled portion to it. Or you have actually 20, and I'm not quite sure and I don't know if any of these 20 would actually even qualify if their income would be below the $66,000 instead of the $43,000. It's something we just don't know. But that's the information that we have. Now, based upon what Council on Aging presented as far as creating more stringent or higher increases based upon income, out of the $705,000 I think we gave away we gave to seniors last year, if we increase the benefit, it would actually just increase the overall grant by $40,270. So in other words, instead of going from, do you have your proposed, yeah, you want to hand that, yeah. Going from 0 to 26,000, that didn't change, but going from 26,000 to 39,500, if we broke that down in half, you would actually be granting a few more people more money. Do you have your original proposed that showed how you were going to break it down? Oh, okay.
Barbara, if we need more copies, just text Joseph and have her come up and make them. Barbara can make.
Okay, so what happened is, this is the fault finding, what the council of aging wants to do is they want to break down, make the income levels smaller.
Small, yeah.
And then increase the.
I have a question which probably is addressed more to Patricia and Lori, maybe to you as well. The, the, the question really is predicated on the following, which may be a faulty premise, so I start right there, you correct me on the premise. In looking at the legislation, so to speak, it contemplates, as I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong, that you could give tax relief up to 0.5% of the total real estate tax property levy, which is why I was asking you what that amount was. Or you want to stop and correct me right away? Go ahead.
I think what that, is that in the, where are you, is that in the local ordinance? Are you reading, it says
It's
that
in
on.
section 12-6.1, property tax relief for seniors.
Right,
Item
but-
4.
Right, what,
Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
number, limit on the assessment?
Yes, limit on the abatement,
On the abatement.
yes.
Okay, if you go to page, right, oh, right. That's something that the Board of Assessment Appeals would set. So we're not at $570,000 anymore, we're at $900,000. But I don't know.
I'm sorry, aren't you at 755?
Well, that's how much I actually had. I
Right.
budgeted 900,000,
okay.
okay? So that number, that number is something I don't get involved with as far as what the budget. I suppose you do, I don't know if you,
Well,
that's.
where I was going, and let me just
Mhm.
go there, and then you can
Yep. So
knock me out of it. Where I was going was, first of all, I thought this was set by the RTM.
Yes, it did,
Oh,
right,
okay.
right.
And what I was going to say, or at least the premise of my thought is, the RTM apparently contemplated, I recognize, by the way, when this was done, it wouldn't have been 31 billion.
Mhm.
But I don't, for purposes of this conversation, it doesn't make any difference. 0.5% of 30 billion is roughly $150 million. Now, I don't know, I think that's right, it's my arithmetic.
But are they
wrong.
looking at our value of the grand list or the value, or the actual annual budget that you, the amount of money you raise from, I don't know what they were contemplating.
I don't know, what is the amount of money we raise?
We raise
Ballpark.
out of property taxes about $300 million out of property taxes, yeah.
So it's $300 million.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So 0.5% of that would be $1.5 million,
Right,
okay?
mm-hmm,
My point, where I was going, and then
Mhm.
I'll get there quickly, is we are well under what somebody contemplated would be a outer but not
Mhm.
unfair
Mhm.
amount of money to be given to seniors for tax credit. We're halfway there under that number. All of which leads me to say, not that because we can raise it, we should raise it, but it seems to me that we're woefully under. We're woefully under. You've taken important steps, I think, to educate people by putting notices in the tax return that says that people can and should apply if otherwise eligible. But But I'm wondering about the amounts. And by the amounts, I know you've broken them down now into smaller categories, and I think that's all to the good. But am I really off base in saying that at the upper limits, what you have as the upper limits is 66,000, and I recognize it is much more generous than the state is doing. But Greenwich, as a town, is much more generous than the state is. Shouldn't the amounts be higher? In other words, somebody living in Greenwich making, and I'm going to pick a number, $75,000, with a family of 4, is really pressed financially. And why shouldn't the town be more responsive? And I'm talking about seniors, obviously. Why shouldn't the town be more responsive to that and give more aid? I mean, $600 is it's nice, but does nothing to anybody. And so I'm urging, and I would like to see us, recognizing that by the time it gets to the RTM, there's another faction that may have different views than I do on life. But I'd like this board to speak to the issue and say, yes, our senior citizens need help. The amounts we're giving are not adequate. We do have leeway. We do want people to stay. We do want people to age and be able to stay in their homes. And we want them to be able to do it with dignity, and this ought to be available to them. So I'd like to see us raise the amounts, because it's the bottom line of where I come from.
I'm Kip Bergweiger, I'm a member of the commission. The actual number, according to the ordinance, is set by the BET. The limits, this 1.5 million currently would be the outer limit for the maximum that could be credited to seniors. And there's also a minimum, which is not less than 570,000. So there's that range, but the BET is the one that sets the actual number according to the ordinance. The RTM could take this ordinance and change 570,000 to 600,000. It could change 1.5% to 2%. It could change it to 1% and force the BET to respond and to fit within what the RTM might have done. One of our concerns has been that we wanted to be certain that this ordinance was continued. And so, and the RTM had, some of the committees had recommended dividing the grid into, so that would accommodate more seniors who had financial limitations and constraints, and that was one of the reasons we put that in. If you wish to increase the amount, and if the BET would go along, we just have to get the approval of 3 bodies, which may or may not all be in agreement. But our concern was principally to get the ordinance reenacted and to try to accommodate things that the RTM had recommended the last time around.
Just so I'm clear, I understand what you say. I'm in total agreement with it. I have no problem with breaking down the categories into smaller groups. That's all fine. If it's the BET that sets the number, somebody's got to get the ball rolling. I'd like this body to get the ball rolling in the right direction. The BET will do what the BET will do. I don't control that. Indeed, I don't control anything, but we can try, at least in this body, to get the ball rolling in the right direction.
So I understand what we were initially asked to do in terms of extend, but as we looked at that, I think as I opened, we were looking to now adjust the parameters to afford the benefit to a larger range of people.
Well, if you include disabled, you're including a larger range of people. The numbers that you've seen in front of you are based on what 2009 and then just adjusted annually in accordance with the formula that's in the ordinance. So in one sense, it may very well include a wider range of persons, or it may not. It just, because actually the numbers that people have applied for have been decreasing to some extent, the seniors.
Just so we're all on the same page. Unless your effort to make people more aware of this tax credit via the tax bills, unless that is particularly successful, we're not necessarily adding more people by breaking down smaller categories. I mean, that doesn't add people. That's going to stay constant. If we add,
An
in some way,
additional income,
disability,
right.
as I understand, Lauren, we could be adding as many as 22 people. And
That we know
probably
of,
less.
right.
Yeah, well, that we know of. And probably less, because it's not unreasonable to guess that some of them aren't seniors and don't otherwise qualify. But in any event, it's 22 at most.
May I interject one thing? What will be interesting to see this year, this is going to sunset in June. What happens is there's a fair amount of seniors that are on the bubble that come in between 65. And it depends on a couple of things. It depends on what happened in the stock market. It depends on what the required minimum distributions are. So it will be interesting to see, based upon what we saw in the stock market, that it decreased substantially if we get more people this year. We had up to 600 people, and it's very cyclical, depending upon what distribution seniors take. And it's hard for us to say, okay, if we go up $5,000 or $10,000, we're going to get another, 100 applicants or 50 applicants. But it is also indicative as to what exactly happens to their income and what they take as distributions and what is going on with their assets. So this year we actually may get more because some of those people won't have made $65,000. They made $62,000 or $59,000. So that's always something that's in play. We do have a fair amount of them that are kind of on the cusp, and it depends on what happens that year.
Well, yeah, it does,
Yeah.
and we can't guess that.
Yeah, and I can't guess that yet.
But it has been a steady progression down, as you
Yes.
note in the numbers, and maybe that will change. I doubt that it's going to radically change in an upward direction. That would surprise me. Could be.
Yeah.
But in any event, what you're talking about is roughly 500 and some odd people. If you're talking about doing something for, which I would favor, the disabled, you're looking at another 20 some odd.
Maybe.
You're talking about $40,000 roughly in increases under the proposal as put forth, which is only breaking down categories. And if I'm right that you've got the leeway that I think you do, we ought to be doing something.
So I just want to say, how do we begin to make that happen?
Yes, well,
That's my question.
that's where I always turn to you and say,
Okay.
now, Peter, what do we do?
So I think what you would do, is you would change your ordinance and you would add another income group from the 60,000. I think it's on page 4.
Either that or you just raise the, no, you can't do
I
that.
can't. It says in the ordinance that I do raise it. If you look in the ordinance, the top income group was from $50,000 to $60,000. The ordinance has since, I think, 2010, we take the CPI.
Yeah, you just increase it.
And we just increase
Yeah.
it. That's what we're allowed to.
And what you're saying is that's the most you can do.
Exactly.
I did not understand that. So we would have to recommend, depending on what Peter says, the way we go about it, a change to this, which would have to be approved by the BET and the RTM. Is that correct? Does anybody know?
That's my understanding. But I guess
Anything we do has to be approved by both of them.
By both. Okay, well, then all I'm proposing, and then the question is the details, is that we get the ball rolling in the right direction. Started here.
Yeah.
If the BET and/or the RTM don't want to go along with it, that's their decision.
Agree.
We do what's right.
That's really what we're saying, is how do we
Yes.
effectuate what we...
I'm a big picture guy. I have no idea how you do things.
Could be approved as it's.
Never had to deal with doing things, just thought of the idea.
Could we approve it as presented with the suggestion that it be raised?
I think it has to be put in. It
Yeah,
has to be put in. The 2 points is one, applying it to
Adding language for being disabled.
disabled.
Right.
Yeah,
That
just
is
remi-
language can be plucked straight out of the state statute and
Right.
put into this ordinance.
And that's by, by the federal government, right? You're-
I take
you're-
a social security disability, there has to be some sort of proof.
Yeah.
Comparable to social security disability. There are other but you have to have some sort of proof of disability, and it has to be 100% disabled.
But under the state ordinance,
Yes.
that's what they use,
Right.
social
So we
security.
could copy that, is
Yeah,
what you're saying.
exactly. You
But
can simply copy that.
I may be asking a very simplistic question, but I just want to be clear in my head. It's social security disability.
As to the upper levels, and maybe this is a question for Lori or Patricia, what evidence would we have, do we have, can you present to us to substantiate it, if correct, how do I put it? The need to raise the upper level so as to encompass people who are making more than $66,000 in this case, but still under what I would think, and I'd like to think we all would think, is a fair standard, ought to qualify for help. What data, if any, do we have indicating the percentage of people that would affect, anything that we can utilize to either substantiate what I think is so viscerally, or to negate it if I'm wrong?
We need that.
Because I think if we're going to do this, we ought to have some data to support us, because otherwise we're going to get killed. Do we have anything? Is there, or are there data that can be done? In other words, I don't even, how did they come up with $60,000 in the first place? I mean, someone came up with a number. Where'd they get it from? Why 60 and not 40 or 80?
Well, there is some census data from 2010 that was available, but it's obviously well out of date.
Yeah.
now.
We've got a new census coming up, of course, but that's not going to help us here. Could you?
So we could look at what data sources are available to us. So for example, individuals that are eligible for the Medicare Savings Program, perhaps in cooperation with Dr. Alan Barry and the financial criteria that's set forth for individuals that receive access to programs through Department of Human Services. I could work with Alan to see, what data is available there. Commission on Aging doesn't keep financial data unless, so there's very little, but we could look at what's available to try to, quantify the impact.
Could you do that? I think that would be helpful to us, and again, in either confirming what is on my thought level of visceral thought, or negating if I'm wrong.
Correct.
So that we have a basis, if in fact there are some data to support us, to recommend this kind of
Right.
expansion, so
Right.
to speak, of the income levels, and therefore expansion in the number of people who would be eligible. I
Right.
think this is important to Greenwich. I really do. If you
And
want
I
people to
agree
stay
with
here,
you, right.
you gotta
I agree.
help as best you
Right.
can.
I agree with you. I know that when folks apply to the assessor's office and they do not qualify, no data is kept on that, because
Yeah.
that would be kind of overwhelming, when you think about all the applications, that come in.
Do you get a lot of applications?
We do,
But usually, we also require tax returns if they
Oh,
file one.
okay.
So, but usually what happens is if people know if they're over, and, they'll bring their tax return in and they'll have us. We won't actually make the application because really we don't necessarily want to keep their tax returns if we don't have to.
So, Lori, just, again, oversimplifying, but if you take Connecticut Economic Resource Center and you look at their statistics, which are updated as of August 1st of 18. Population, 65 and plus for Greenwich, out of 62,418, they say there's 10,320. Help me out here.
Yeah, 10,321.
20. 20 persons are 65 and
got
over,
it,
so
got it.
age.
Okay.
So we could substantiate what, and you probably have that probably too. But then I think where we're trying to go is within that, how do we drill down into what their income is? And that's where I think, we're struggling to,
Mhm.
I think, we totally agreed. It would be nice to get more people in the program. Our biggest fear right now today is getting this extended. Because the last time we did it, we did a blitz of going to every meeting in town, and there was a lot of pushback. People saying, well, if they can't afford it, they should move. Well, it's the young versus the old.
Yeah.
And it's a continuing battle, and our greatest fear is that we go finally to the RTM and they say, don't need it. And so what we're thinking is if we could get this sunset extended 10 years instead of 5, because 5 comes around way too quickly, we could then have time to push it up, do more. Maybe we can do a step now and then look to step it again, but I think our greatest fear is that it just vanishes.
Well, if we could get data that confirms or denies the premise we're talking about, I think this board would act on it fairly quickly. In other words, I'm mindful of your June date, and there's no reason we should not make that. I have said, number one, just personally, I think you may have trouble with your 10 years versus 5 years at the RTM. Just my personal guess. But more importantly, or importantly for this purpose, I think if we're going to raise the levels and address this, we ought to do it now. The time is right. We ought to do it at one fell swoop. I'm very mindful of your point about not running into this, still talking here in May about something that we want to get done, because it is important to get something done.
Well,
But
it's a
if we could do
united
something
front.
in the next 30 days or 45 days, I think that would be adequate to deal with your concerns. And I would hope that Lori can get whatever she can get, and it's going to be limited, that will enable us to make a decision if we can.
Well, obviously, a united front carries a lot
It's
more
helpful.
weight.
Yes.
so I think there's concurrence on applying to the disabled. I don't want to speak for John, but I support applying the disabled. I think it's just the right thing to do. Talking about
And it's so few.
it's just,
I agree, particularly because there's so few, but I'd agree even if there weren't so
Yeah,
few.
right.
Yes.
It's just disabilities, you never know when it could be you or someone, and that's just values, the judgment. The other is really, we're talking about, I don't know, we're talking about data to know how many people we could impact, right?
Exactly. How many people need that? Well, it's twofold, really. How many people we would impact, and at what level do we have to impact them? In other words, how high do you have to go? I mean, if someone said, well, people making $400,000 a year need help, I'd say, forget it. I mean, you're kidding. But as you come down to whether it's 65 or 70 or 75 or 80, I don't know where that number is, but there is a number there.
And we're at, right now,
66.
66.
For which they get $500. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not particularly
So
helpful.
we could do that, try to figure out that, I don't know how. Well, I guess we'll say,
Let's get what we can.
we'll
Let's
take a
get-
look at it and see what we can come up with.
Precisely. That's all we can do.
So we have the meeting on the 24th. I think again, John, if you could just opine, I think incorporating the language in the revision that applies for disabled is step one. I think there's concurrence on that. And then the second piece is the more challenging piece, of which we're trying
Yes.
is to see if we can get some data. I mean, I was just looking at this economic resource. I don't think it has it. It just gave the age breakout, but perhaps, I don't know, CCM, I know, do you use them too?
Yeah, the only other thing that comes to mind is perhaps through United Way and again through our Department of
Maybe.
Human Services. You know, the acronym ALICE, right? So the Asset Limited Income, whatever, Employed, Income Constrained Employed. I believe that there was about 28% of our population that fell into that, but I don't know how that's stratified by age. So again, you know, it does require a deeper dive. And as Kip articulated, he's been trying to quantify this because there are other communities that do have a higher threshold for the program in terms of what they pay out, but their mill rates are higher, at least twice as high. So
Well, this isn't going to affect the mill rate.
no, right,
to
but
that
we're just
level.
saying, when we look at other communities
Yes.
and what they do, perhaps we could look at what some of their data
Yes,
sources are
yes.
and how, what were the determinants
How
that
comparable
went
are they?
into, right, exactly. So I think that there's some work for us to do in this area. I'm not sure how successful, you know, we'll be, but at least we'll, you know, we'll give it our best shot.
I have one last question for me anyway, which is, and maybe Patricia's the one who ought to address. What does the RTM do at the end of 5 years? I guess my question is the issue that they face, you want to go to 10 years, I understand. Is it just simply renewing the, if I can call it a statute, that,
Yeah, it's
that's all it
simply
is?
a renewal, yeah.
Why did, okay.
And, well, the question is, why do they even question it?
Yeah, why do they care? In other words, you built in how much you can do in terms of increasing. You can't run amok. You have a formula in there that's limiting. Why would they want to reaffirm this every 5 years? I mean, it makes no sense. Okay, I just wanted to understand.
Actually, they didn't want to reaffirm it every 5 years. They wanted the opportunity to kill it every 5 years.
You don't tell them
Well,
that.
okay. So you're trying to take the gun away from them, is what you're saying? Well, it's part of our whole Connecticut against gun violence. Just take the gun away.
I just found on United Way, Greenwich United Way, Laura, you had mentioned it, the most recent data from the needs assessment shows 6% of Greenwich households are at or below the federal poverty level. In 21% of households are in the United Way ALICE category.
Yeah, that's the number I think Lori or someone
Yeah.
gave us last
Right.
time. I
So-
remember. What does the Alice category mean, Peter? Just so I,
Asset limited, income constrained, employed.
what does that really mean?
So that means individuals that are still working,
Yeah.
but
Don't make enough
don't
money.
make enough money.
Well, what level do they use? I mean, how do they define
Let's
that?
see, I think I can find that for you.
It's a tenuous term to hear David Raven say. It's basically been saying, if you miss a paycheck, you're covered. Can you put it that?
So, but it's a nebulous, there's no,
It is a bit
I mean,
nebulous.
you know,
You can
this,
speak to it more
Yes,
than I can.
it's the folks
Basically,
that
if
are
you
on
miss
the
a
fringe,
paycheck,
right.
then all kinds of problems can happen.
And that's for families of four.
Ken, I think you wrote this.
family of four, yeah. I mean, that's the standard that they use.
No, you didn't. You didn't, so maybe I shouldn't read from it. But it says,
Always quote a reliable source. Ken.
so again, this is not as current, but maybe it says in this article, this was 16, out of a total population of 61,171, more than 3,100 or 5% of people live in poverty in town. Based
Wow.
on the federal poverty level, that means an annual income of 24,300 for a family of four. So 5%,
Well, now we're up to 6%.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
it's-
Yeah, it's gone up.
but that, to give us context, if that's the number,
Yeah.
let's just say it's 26,000, because it's still not a lot of money.
Mhm. Oh, no.
Another 7,500 or 12% of individuals qualify as ALICE. That's that.
But again, what I'm saying is, that was 12%. You've just given us a number of 21%, or
It's
you
up.
did, today. I mean, it's up hugely. I mean, that's a big jump in 2 years. If you wrote that in 2016, we're at 2018 or 2019, that's a major increase.
Yeah, but again, that's all
No, I understand it's not
residents, you know, and
seniors
not just
necessarily.
seniors, and that's what's hard to.
Although I would
right?
guess a fair proportion,
I would
guess a
imagine
fair
a
proportion
percentage
are
of those
seniors.
are older
Right.
adults, I
Yeah.
would imagine, yeah.
Maybe you could talk to the United Way people and see if they can give you a better
Absolutely.
feel for that, see
Perhaps
if
they
they can
have the
quantify it in
breakdown.
some way.
Right, perhaps they do have a
What percentage of those people do not own houses but live in rentals?
Good question.
That's another element.
Good
of
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we know there's 10,000 people over 65, right? That's CERC. I have faith in that. So and then we have to drill that down.
We got that.
Okay.
So we're going to put it back on for
Yeah,
the
we're
24th and see if we can,
Yeah, so we're
Deal with
gonna, who's gonna adjust the language to incorporate the,
We can do it.
so you'll do that? Okay.
Just
And then
wanna add a
this is,
sentence
okay.
good.
or two.
And are we
Thanks,
incorporating the
good.
new grid? We have to do the data first, okay. But the breakdowns, are we incorporating those, increase those breakdowns within the grid not to exceed the
That's-
66?
That's what we have in there now.
That's what's in there now.
Yeah.
So the only thing that we're going to come back to discuss would be our data findings and then ultimately your decision as to whether or not that upward threshold should be increased.
Yes, and
Okay, I
at
just
least for
wanted
my
to make
part, I
certain.
would like a recommendation
Right,
from
okay.
you, a proposal,
I understand.
that it should or should not be increased, at what level, and if you were to say, and I'm making this up, oh, we should increase it to 80,000, but we should have steps between 66 and 80, then
understand.
you should recommend that too,
Okay.
if
Okay.
that's what you propose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, according to this document, again, here, CERC, 6.3% of our population is within the poverty rate.
6.3, did you say?
Yeah, so you're looking at demographic poverty rate, 2012, average 6.3, county 8.
So you're looking at about 4,000 people.
How
Is that families or people?
People.
People.
Yeah, because it's totaling out to this number, 62,000. So this all reconciles.
People, yeah, I got it.
Take that. Yeah, so this is just a place, if we get every town, we could use.
Yeah,
something.
but where I was going is if you had a family of 4, if the family isn't under poverty, and then they're listing 4 people, that's what I'm saying, it's really a family that is under the poverty level.
Yes.
Because they're measuring the poverty level by family.
Thank you, Lauren. I just want to thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Patricia and Kip.
Thank you, Lori, in absentia.
And Lori, yeah, Lori. So we have no other old business. Okay. And so, just so I'm clear, so once we do that, are we going to transition into? All right, so you need a motion to go into executive session right now.
So move.
Without objection, and that is for the purpose of discussing pending litigation, settlement of claims, and interviewing candidates for boards and commissions. And just to be clear and very transparent with our friend Mr. Borsek, so what we are doing is we're interviewing a person for a board, and we are going to hear about 4 property tax appeals, which we come out and we vote on in public session.
We're waiting for the candidates to come up so I can speak to you about the fields.
Yeah.
The disconnect between the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen on this, because you want one thing, the Board of Ed wants another. Where's the communication here?
We are.
So look at it this way, these are on school property. You know, so they're call it the landlord. We maintain their properties as part of the agreement in 2000. They put, are you available Wednesday to come to a meeting with their planning subcommittee? Of course not. I'm gonna track you down if you're not.
Okay, we are now resuming the regular portion of Board of Selectmen meeting.
And we will proceed to act on 4 property tax settlements that were presented to the board.
Okay, the first one is Curtis versus the Town of Greenwich. And there is a reduction in the tax assessment that will be taken as a credit of approximately $26,145 against future tax payments. If the plaintiffs were to have prevailed at trial, they would have been entitled to a cash refund of approximately $44,910 plus interest and cost.
Move to affirm.
Second.
Without objection.
The next is Bessich. Yes.
We're moving to approve.
Okay. The next one is, pardon my pronunciation if it's not exactly correct, Bessich versus the Town of Greenwich. And that is for a reduction in the assessment that will be taken as a tax credit of approximately $24,516 against future tax payments. If the plaintiffs were to have prevailed at trial, they would have been entitled to a cash refund of approximately $33,470 plus interest and cost.
Move to confirm it.
Second.
Without objection.
Next is by Yum versus the Town of Greenwich, and this is for a reduction in the tax assessment that will be taken as a credit of approximately $4,178 against future tax payments. If the plaintiffs were to have prevailed at trial, they would have been entitled to a cash refund of approximately $17,905 plus interest and costs.
Move to approve it.
Second.
Without objection.
Finally, we have Zhao Zhang versus the Town of Greenwich, and that is for a reduction in the tax assessment that will be taken as a credit for approximately $11,373 against future tax payments. If the plaintiff were to have prevailed at trial, it would have been entitled to a cash refund of approximately $29,669 plus interest and cost.
Move to approve it.
Second.
Without objection.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Without objection, the next meeting is on
Thursday, January the 24th.
January 24th. Thank you. I answered, no, I'm gonna be late. I'll update you guys. It wasn't that urgent. It was on just, I'm working with